Hey guys, what's going on? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and as always on Mondays I talk to you about X-Men storylines and X-Men related topics, and today I want to talk to you about the first 6 issues of Joss Whedon and John Cassaday's Astonishing X-Men run. I have this run in omnibus form, so I'm going to be using this whenever I review each storyline of this series, but I'm only talking about the first 6 issues of this run called Gifted. Right off the bat, I wanted to go ahead and say something before I forget to talk about it in this video, and I'm probably going to forget to talk about it in future videos where I review the rest of the arcs of the series, but John Cassaday's art here is absolutely phenomenal. He is both one of the best things about the series and also probably one of the worst things. When I say the worst, what I mean is I remember when this series was first coming out in single issues, and John Cassaday's art, while it is very gorgeous and very beautiful, he is also a very painstakingly methodical artist. He is not going to rush his artwork if it means getting it out quicker, because that's probably going to mean that he's going to have inferior art as a final product. And I can respect that. I very much understand his approach to doing that. My problem that I had back when I was reading this series in single issues is that this whole run is only 25 issues long, but it took him about 4 years to finish the series. And let's be honest, it probably was partly on Joss Whedon also. Around the time when this series was going on, Whedon was just finishing up Angel Season 5, and he was also working on the Serenity movie, so he had a lot of other balls in the air going on as well. But I feel like a large chunk of why this series was so late most of the time was because of John Cassaday really taking his time on the artwork. And that can be really good when you're reading this series in an omnibus like this. When you're not reading it month to month, and more often than not you're waiting on issues instead of actually reading the issues as they come out, it can be a lot more enjoyable when you're reading it as one giant unit instead of waiting for it piece by piece. Because when you're reading it in an omnibus form, or even for trade paperbacks, which is probably going to be cheaper for you to get than an omnibus, whenever you're reading it like this, it feels much more like it is a piece of artwork and not just, we have to get this out, we have to get this issue out, it's really late, let's just throw another artist on there. This feels a lot more like an artistic collaboration between these two guys, instead of this is an X-Men series and we have to get these issues out, so let's get a replacement artist on there. That's kind of the beauty of looking at this in retrospect in collected form, is it's not hampered by the lateness of the artwork and the lateness of the issues or anything like that. So that is something that I appreciate more now than I did when I was reading this series over 10 years ago. But I really enjoyed the artwork overall, even though back whenever the series was coming out and I was getting frustrated that it's been 3 months and we haven't had an issue yet, I still really loved the issues every time they came out. I loved the artwork. I loved everything about the artwork. And one thing that I can say about Cassaday is I really don't feel like his artwork declines in quality as this series is going on. And that's probably because he didn't rush himself. He didn't try to meet deadlines. He would just try to make the artwork look as good as it was ever going to look, and then he would have the issue come out whenever it came out. And you can definitely look through this series and see that the artwork stays pretty consistent in quality throughout. Now, I may change my mind as I'm reading the rest of these storylines in the coming weeks, but I don't remember the artwork ever actually declining in quality. I think it stayed pretty solid throughout the 25 issues collected here. So that is definitely a plus for this book. I should go ahead and talk about the storyline that I'm reviewing here. I probably should have done that before I went into the artwork. Basically, there is this doctor, a former colleague of the Beast, Dr. Kavita Rao. She has created a cure for mutants, and the X-Men are going to investigate this to see if this is a legit thing, and in their investigation they find out that this cure has been tested on Colossus, who has long been thought to be dead. Colossus isn't actually cured of the mutant disease, as Dr. Rao calls it, but for some reason, somehow, they've been testing it on him without actually fully using the cure on him. And so the X-Men, they go and they rescue Colossus, and we find out there is this alien named Ord, and he is from the Break World, and he is basically the reason that Dr. Rao has this cure. He gave her all the necessary ingredients and technology to create this cure, and we find out that on the Break World, they have this prophecy that one of the X-Men is going to destroy the planet, the entire Break World. And so Ord came to this planet presumably to use Dr. Rao, and then once she had a cure ready, then he was going to go and use the cure forcibly on the X-Men to save his planet. And this storyline definitely ends with several loose plot threads out there that will be tied up in later volumes. So if you just read the first 6 issues, you might get a taste of what's going on here, but there's definitely a lot under the surface that hasn't hasn't been addressed yet. For example, on the very last page of this storyline, Emma Frost is talking to somebody, and we don't know who it is, and they're like, when the time is right, we will strike. And that's something that will be handled in the next volume. We don't know as of yet who is going to destroy the Break World, or rather, who has been prophesied to destroy the Break World, and we will find out about that in the final volume of the final storyline of this series. But overall, I feel like this storyline does what the name of the book suggests that it will do. I remember reading the very first issue of this series on the day that it came out. I bought that comic, and I remember reading it 3 times that day. I was completely blown away. Pun intended, I was astonished by this series. That last page of issue 1, where Dr. Rouse says that she has a cure for mutants, my jaw was on the floor. I was completely floored. And as you go further and further into the series, I feel like it loses a little bit of that pow, bam, holy cow, that just happened. There's a couple of other times in this series, at least one other time in this storyline, where they try to end on another end of the issue wow cliffhanger, and it doesn't have that same effect as issue 1. There's one issue where Beast, he comes running in and says, hey, the people who made this cure, they're using it on a friend of ours. And then he says, why can't anything ever stay buried? And then Scott says, Jean? And you're thinking, oh wow, they're bringing Jean back. And then it turns out, no, they're not bringing Jean back. That was just kind of a fake out, and not really a very clever fake out either. Joss Whedon, I guess, just wanted to yank everyone's chain and say, look, I'm bringing back Jean. And then, no, turns out he's bringing back Colossus. It's a bit of a red herring, and I guess it's there so that people wouldn't guess that he was bringing back Colossus. But it seems unfair to me that he would throw that out there and then not even address it in the next issue. In the next issue, we don't even have anything of Emma saying, hey, how dare you be thinking about your dead ex-girlfriend? I'm here now. You should be thinking about me. At one point in this entire storyline, Emma says something about, I know that she's in the back of your thoughts. And Scott says, you take that when you take me. It's the whole package or nothing. That's part of the deal. And that's something that is addressed a lot further in, I believe, Matt Fraction's run on Uncanny. Years after this storyline came out, Cyclops and Emma kind of had a powwow where they talked a little bit about how Cyclops is always thinking about Jean, even when he's with Emma. And, you know, it's one of those things that I feel like it could have been handled a little better here. When Cyclops at the end of that issue is like, oh wow, they're bringing Jean back, and not really prompted to say that. It's really weird that he says that. Beast just comes in and says, hey, they're testing the cure, why can't anything stay buried? And Cyclops immediately says, Jean? It's really strange that he would jump to those conclusions, and it's even stranger that we don't even get a follow-up to that conversation in the next issue. It just kind of jumps forward in time, and then I guess they've had a conversation that we've missed because then later on, a few of the X-Men seem to be aware that Colossus is under the basement of this laboratory, except for Kitty Pryde. She's the only one who doesn't know. But in terms of bringing Colossus back, I guess I should talk about that. It works okay, I guess. It's one of those things that I feel like Joss Whedon, he comes in and he's a big, huge, big-name TV writer and movie writer, and then he comes in and says, I want to bring back Colossus. And everyone else says, yes, sir, Mr. Whedon, whatever you say, sir. At the time that this series first started coming out, Marvel had a big dead is dead policy no matter what. Chris Claremont had killed off Psylocke just a couple years earlier, and then he immediately wanted to bring her back, and then they said, no, you can't do that. And then Joss Whedon comes on board and he says, I'm going to bring back Colossus. And they all say, absolutely, whatever you say, you can do whatever you want to do. And I feel like it's one of those things that Whedon just wanted to come in and kind of work with his favorite toys. He didn't really, I don't want to say he didn't have a respect for the stories that came before, but I do feel like bringing Colossus back here kind of lessens the impact of his sacrifice that happened in the early 2000s. And that's a story that probably a lot of people haven't even read. If you buy this omnibus, there's actually a couple of pages before the actual story starts that basically just sums up the previous 40 years of X-Men history. It kind of sums up all the stuff that's going to be referenced here, such as Scott and Jean, Kitty Pryde and Colossus, stuff like that. And it does touch on Colossus sacrificing himself to eliminate the legacy virus. And I feel like that sacrifice is kind of made null and void when we find out, oh, he didn't actually die. These aliens just hid him away in this basement so that they could test this mutant cure on him for 7 or 8 years. It's a really weird reveal that doesn't actually work, in my opinion. I'm glad that they brought Colossus back because I feel like they've done some very interesting things with him in the years since this series started. They've taken him very far away from from the character that he was when he was first created, but I feel like they've taken him in some interesting directions, even if he is a very different character than what he was 30 years ago. But I feel like they could have done a better job of bringing him back. Instead of just saying, surprise, here he is, the reveal doesn't really make a lot of sense, is I guess what I'm trying to say. He's just there, and they don't really explain, oh, well, they switched his body with someone else's body, and those are the ashes that Kitty went and scattered in Russia. Okay, whose body was that? Was it just some dude? How did they bring him back to life? That's something that's never touched on here. In this series, we are kind of led to believe that the people of Breakworld are very technologically advanced. At one point, Ord straight up says that it is his people's technology that has given Dr. Rao this cure for mutants. And then at one point, he mentions that he brought back Colossus back from the dead. At the very end of the series, we actually get to see Breakworld, and we see that that is not at all the kind of world that Ord has been painting a picture for us for in the first volume, in the first storyline. And that's something that's not even touched on at all until near the end of the first Uncanny X-Men series, when Kieran Gillen was writing. I believe it was Gillen's first storyline, where he kind of brings back the Breakworld aliens and kind of explains a little bit of how Colossus was brought back from the dead, which... good, I guess, because it's definitely not touched on here. It's kind of an inconsistency here, and I'll get more into that, I guess, whenever I talk about the final storyline of the series. But overall, I really enjoyed these first 6 issues. They definitely had a very snappy, bam, wow kind of factor to it. I'm having trouble using real words right now. They definitely had a certain punch to them that I feel like the X-Men comics had been lacking for a really long time. I personally, looking at all of the X-Men comics of that decade, I don't think there had been any X-Men stories that really had this amount of wow, that was really awesome since the very beginning of Grant Morrison's X-Men run. And I hate to say it, even though Whedon's run is not the best thing ever, I know a lot of people out there just worship this series and the ground that it walked on. It's not the best X-Men series ever. I can't really think of a whole lot of X-Men series that have had this punch that this series had since then. I can't think of a whole lot of others that have really been able to have measured up to the caliber of this series. So I feel like, even though I feel like this storyline and overall this entire series has some problems, I think that overall this storyline definitely is one of the best X-Men stories of the previous decade. It gets a little different as the series goes on, and I'll talk about that more in the coming weeks. But this storyline, anyway, is a really good storyline. And if you're thinking of getting the Astonishing X-Men series in trades, I would highly recommend getting Astonishing X-Men Gifted. It's a really good story, has some interesting mysteries that are going to be followed up on in later storylines, but overall, the character work is really good. The artwork is phenomenal. All in all, I highly recommend Astonishing X-Men Gifted. And next week, I'll be talking about the next storyline in the series, which will be Dangerous. So if you guys want to check that out, be sure to do that. And I will be doing some other videos throughout the rest of this week. So I will see you guys in the future. Have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.